So, the topic today is guts and brains, which you might have a bunch of guesses what that means, and they'll probably all be wrong. Um, Somebody sent me a message asking what I think about something, and often that happens, and I think I should just make a video about that. They were talking about how um, even after you learn the principles of non aggression and how government is illegitimate and all that fun stuff, um, there can still be this residual sort of gut level instinctive reaction against disobeying authority, or when you're dealing with a cop or somebody supposed to be authority. There's like this instinctive feeling of basically feeling bad, like something's wrong if I disobey. um, and I totally notice that too. I can notice it in myself, and it's a weird phenomenon. So I wanted, when I title this thing Guts and Brains, it's about the fact that we can intellectually understand something, but that doesn't mean that on our instinctive subconscious level we're really in tune with that yet. And there's, a million other examples that can be used that have nothing to do with statism. For example, there's lots of people who are arachnophobes. They're totally terrified of spiders, even if they intellectually know, I know these dumb little spiders are no real threat to me. Like, they're not allergic or anything. It's just so existentially creepy that they freak out. Or people can be scared of height. I mean, you can be scared of heights in the rational way, as in you don't want to fall and die. But if you're in a building and looking out, and you can look down and, like, you're not going to suddenly go sailing out the window. So your intellectual brain says, I'm 100% safe. This is not a concern at all. But your guts can go, ugh, if you're scared of heights. And trying to get your brain to talk your guts into not having that response is very difficult. A lot of people never manage to achieve that. And the same is true when you philosophically get over the notion of statism. There can still be residual subconscious tendencies to want to obey authority, and this feeling of unease and nervousness if you don't. Now, I'm not even talking about like being scared that the thug with the badge is going to beat you up. That makes perfect sense. There's nothing subtle about that. Because yes, disobeying an authority figure, if he's going to enforce it on you, there's a reason to be concerned for your safety and well-being if you're doing that. I'm talking about the gut level trained in reaction that is difficult to overcome. Another obvious example is PTSD. If somebody's like actually just spent months in a war zone with stuff blowing up around them constantly and constantly thinking, at any moment they're going to die, and then they go home and a car backfires and they totally freak out and hide in a corner, explaining to them that was just a car backfiring. Like, okay, that it's nice to start by getting their like aware brain on board and going, okay, like if they were asleep and they wake up and they have to go, okay, I'm not in a war zone, I'm just home, that was just car backfiring. But getting their intellectual brain to understand it doesn't make the feeling go away. It doesn't just magically make that instinctive, very deep subconscious feeling and reaction just vanish, unfortunately. So, as much, I say this in a million different contexts, as much as we think that we're like these thinking, reasonable beings, most of the time, no, we're not. And we're largely governed by our instincts and our gut level feelings more than by what we intellectually understand. In fact, we now have a shining example of that over the last year and a half, where a bunch of people, based on the fear that there might be something about to kill them, even if they, like, a lot of the time, they don't even bother to look into the statistics of, okay, in my age group, and if I'm perfectly healthy and I'm in my, 20s or whatever, not me, I'm in my 50s. If they look into it and say, oh, well, this thing's not going to kill me, the likelihood of that is zero. But they can still walk around sort of feeling scared because the media is telling them to be scared of something. And, tyrants completely live off of that, completely live off of the fact that fear skips the brains and goes right to the guts. and gives this uneasy feeling of, oh my gosh, something bad's going to happen. I better, whatever they tell you to do. I better obey the people on TV telling me to do all these stupid counterproductive things. But when you intellectually overcome statism, when you like logic your way out of the cult of authoritarianism, that doesn't mean that the trained in Pavlovian response is just going to vanish. If a cop pulls up and says, "Do you know I pulled you over?" like years of training will make most people, including most anarchists, feel like they should go, "Well, I was just like," as if you have some obligation to explain it to this doofus. Again, there's a difference between like self-preservation, like there's this power-happy twit with a badge who may beat the crap out of me or arrest me or something. That's a perfectly rational concern. But the feeling of obligation to obey, like, oh no, I need the approval of authority, is that the residual effect of that can last a very long time. And if you look at, some dog that was abused, and like a rescue dog that had a really horrible life, and then some nice person rescued it who's very nice to it, the dog is still expecting to be beaten or mistreated or starved or whatever. Like its brain is so much in the mode of reacting in a certain way that when the circumstances completely change, the sort of the autopilot programmings running inside the brain don't automatically change. They're still expecting what they're used to. And there's, when it comes to humanity, there's like literally thousands of examples I could give. A bunch of people who lived through the Great Depression, they got older and then they had a bunch of money and they're still like so careful with every penny because they were so traumatized that you have to be careful with every penny, that when they're like sitting on several $1,000,000, they're like, well, is it 5 cents? I'm going to count out my change out of my purse, because they were so freaking traumatized by that. Even if intellectually they say, yeah, the change doesn't really matter. I have tons of money. This is sort of silly. And so I first of all want to sympathize with people with anarchists who feel this. And I felt it for a long time. I mean, I can't even say for sure it's all the way gone. I kind of think it is, but I don't know. But I felt it for a long time, that weird internal struggle of, because, I had my adventures with the federal extortion racket. And when government and the courts are saying you're bad and naughty for not doing what we told you and stuff, there's my intellectual brain is like, first of all, I didn't even disobey your stupid laws. Second of all, I had no obligation to obey your stupid laws to begin with. But as it happens, I actually was, and you were lying about them. But aside from the factual intellectual thing, just the disapproval of authority is something that almost all of us were trained to feel so bad about. Like when the teacher says, "Oh, you're misbehaving, you go sit in the corner." It's not just, "Oh, I do this and then I go sit in a corner." It's, I'm supposed to feel bad about myself because authority didn't approve of whatever I did. And that's everywhere. Like parents do that, and most parents do that. Teachers do that. Government obviously does that. But that feeling of disapproval of authority is a very manipulative thing. Now, a lot of people aren't going to understand what I'm going to say now if you didn't grow up in this setting. There, just a generation or two ago, well, I may be talking to people where I already am a generation ago to them. There were a lot of places where people were raised so authoritarian that the parents didn't have to be physically abusive. It was just the disapproval thing of like, oh, you're so naughty and so bad if you don't bow to the authority of your parents or the, whatever it is, whoever the authority is right then. And I think people who grew up being like physically smacked, like you disobey your parents, you get smacked in the face or you get spanked or something, they look at that and go, so you were never hit. What's the problem? And they don't get how much, when you're a tiny little person with a tiny little brain, the psychological shaming and disapproval routine that authoritarian parents often did is really freaking traumatic because it's training the brain to feel bad about disobedience. Not just feel like, oh, I might get hit, but feeling like I'm a bad person because I didn't obey. And sadly, you can literally see this in dogs. When somebody goes, oh, bad dog, why did you do that? And the dog goes like this because they totally want approval because they're a pack animal. Like this works even on dogs, and it certainly works on people. And so a lot of people who weren't physically disciplined were still intimidated and shamed into this control pattern where if you don't do what the authorities tell you, whether they're teachers or parents or whatever else, they make you feel bad about yourself. So it isn't just, well, there's a physical consequence to disobedience. It's this weird existential thing. And luckily, I think that has faded a lot in recent generations. Like, I think most people don't really have that anymore in the US. It may still be just as much in other cultures. I don't know much about them, as much about them. But so all that to say that I like, don't feel bad if you still notice inside you, like your brain understands they don't have the right to rule me, and yet you still get a lump in your throat if you get pulled over by the cops, or you get a letter from a court or something or other, the IRS or something. Again, not just the stress of, oh, these bozos might harass me and try to take my money or arrest me, or like, that's perfectly rational, but the feeling of, oh no, disapproval from authority, because that is likely to stay there for a long time, even after your brain all the way completely understands. Now, so that's the bad news, is you can totally have that residual feeling that's uncomfortable and gross, even if your rational mind is going, why on earth do I feel that when I know it's bogus? I know it's illegitimate. I don't have any obligation to please these crooked psychos. And yet, if you've been trained like a dog your whole life to cower and feel bad if they catch you disobeying, that's going to be subconsciously, that's going to be a psychological response you have probably for a while. Maybe forever, but hopefully you can overcome it as you gradually, as more and more what you understand up here sort of soaks into your guts until you all the way understand it to the depths of your soul. So the bad news is there can be residual feeling like you're supposed to obey authority, even when your brain says, no, I'm not. I'm supposed to like use my own conscience and do the right thing regardless of what authority proclaims. So that's the bad news. Here's the good news. When the gut level feeling of obligation deteriorates and fades and dissolves, however you want to describe it, the intellectual is really easy to fix. And that is why so many people today are so much more open to the idea of anarchism, because on a gut level, without anything philosophical or thought out, on a gut level, a hell of a lot of people understand how the politicians are all just these slimy crooks, and they make up these stupid rules, and they're not for our benefit. Obviously, they're not for our benefit. They do these bailouts where they take trillions of dollars from us and give it to banks to save them from crumbling when the banks got caught doing massive frauds that was going to crash them. They just directly rob us, so screw them. It doesn't take a coherent philosophical view of reality for someone to have the gut level feeling that authority is bogus. And I've talked to a ton of people who are anarchists who sort of describe, like, growing up, I had a natural resentment for authority and anybody who thought they had the right to rule me. I didn't when I was growing up. I'm sad to admit it. I didn't. I believed like they were nice enough, and I believed it enough that I just sort of felt and thought that, well, this is how things are supposed to be, and you're supposed to obey your parents and obey the teachers and obey the blah, 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 and obey the law because we need law and order. And I believed all that crap, never thought about it, but didn't have sort of a gut reaction against it. Well, now, as the system gets more and more ridiculous and abusive and obviously self-serving, I think a lot of people are growing up not just with a distrust of authority, but a complete disdain for it, and an understanding, a gut level understanding, whether they've ever philosophically thought about it or not, a gut level understanding that these crooks don't have the right to do any of this. This is just a giant, ridiculous injustice. And to me, and I've said this before, to me, that is more important than the number of people who intellectually can spell out why government is inherently illegitimate, which, that's what I'm going for. That's almost everything I focus on is trying to get people to understand that. But the gut level makes it so much easier. And I'm telling you, the gut level half a century ago in people made it so the vast majority of them would not have been able to think about the possibility of government being completely bogus because they were so thoroughly trained into the obedience to authority thing that they couldn't imagine it any other way, even on a gut level. And that has changed drastically. And there are a lot of indications. I mean, the outright pathetic worship of the President of the United States used to just be ridiculous. And probably a bunch of you don't even remember that time. But before, you don't go out and say the president sucks. You don't you don't go out and say let's go Brandon or fuck Joe Biden as the case may be. You don't say, oh, you must, even if you disagree with his policies, you must respect the office of the president. Almost everybody believed that shit. And now most people are like, no, I don't. Screw you. President's a slimy crook. President's always a slimy crook. Both parties are slimy crooks. And even the people who still prefer one set of slimy crooks to the other set of slimy crooks, most of them now know on an instinctive level they're all slimy crooks. And that shift in gut level perception of the world is more important overall than the intellectual thing, because the intellectual thing happens a lot easier when you sort of understand this situation is bogus, this arrangement is bogus, those guys are all crooks, we don't really have an obligation. Like, maybe you still think you have to try to vote the best one in, but somewhere you're just thinking, oh, this whole circus is just a pathetic blah, blah. Making the intellectual step when your gut is already there is really easy compared to when you're all the way indoctrinated. And seeing that shift in so many ways. I'll mention this again. I know I mentioned this a million times. But they did a poll a few years back and said, if you could cheat on your taxes and get away with it, is there anything wrong with that? A majority of Americans said, nope, I'd be morally okay with that. Which means those people don't feel a moral obligation to pay tribute to these slimeballs. And that is massive. That is utterly massive. Because if you're trying to rob people who feel an obligation to give you their money, that's pretty easy if you're in the position of the tyrant. If you're trying to rob people who don't feel that obligation, job gets a lot harder for your thugs when people are like, well, if I could get out of being robbed by them, I totally would. And that's what a majority of Americans said. And that was a few years ago. Today, it's probably even higher. And that's an indication of the gut level thing of, are you beholden to these crooks? And a lot of people at that gut instinct level now totally feel, no, I'm not. They're slime balls. I may still vote for these slime balls over those slime balls. So, but I think it's important to understand the weird dichotomy in people that we have this intellectual brain and we also have this gut level feeling, our feelses, and sometimes the feelses lead and it takes a while for the brain to catch up, and sometimes the brain leads and it takes a while for the feelses to catch up. But either way, to see this many people moving away from statism, either because they just instinctively go, ugh, this whole circus is an abomination, which a ton of people now feel, and they're ready for their brain to be nudged, or the people who, like I did and like I'm sure a bunch of you did, sort of intellectually figured out, oh, it can't be legitimate. Whether we need it or not, it can't be legitimate because I can't delegate a right I don't have, yada, yada, yada. And then sometimes the gut instinct has to follow if you've been trained to be obedient, it takes a while for that training to sort of wear off. But whether somebody's on that path with their brain dragging their feels or with their feels dragging their brain, I don't really care because they're going to get there either way. And I actually think there is more good news. As much as there are lots and lots and thousands of people I know who now intellectually understand self-ownership, non-aggression, voluntarism, I think there are way, 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 way more who on a gut level have gotten to the point where they have zero respect for political authority. And I think that's why you see people like Woody Harrelson, calling himself an anarchist, and Aaron Rodgers, quarterback for the Packers. There was a big to-do about the vaccine thing because he didn't worship at the altar of Big Pharma. To me, first of all, way to have a spine and dare to talk about that when the whole rest of the world, when you know they're going to condemn you and attack you and mischaracterize you and demonize you for doing that. Good job. And Cole Beasley, too, of the Buffalo Bills. But to me, the thing that Aaron said that just made me go, oh, yes, is he said, I'm going to paraphrase, but this is pretty close. He said, like, the right is going to rejoice me and the left is going to cancel me, and I don't care about either one of them. Politics is just a joke. Wasn't quite verbatim, but it was pretty damn close to that. And that is a perfect expression of the gut level instinctive, just, I'm done with this crap, it's all a joke, that is drastically spreading throughout the country and throughout the world in a bunch of places. And those people are very, very ready to have their brain, their philosophical intellect, follow what their gut instincts already knows and is already telling them. And so that's, the control freaks, if they're not peeing in their pants, they should be. Because a hell of a lot of people feel no obligation to bow to their stupidity anymore. And again, whether it's gut instincts leading and then their brains figure out the whole philosophy of, oh yeah, they're actually illegitimate. And here's why. Because I've talked to a bunch of what I refer to as default anarchists, people who just sort of instinctively knew it. And then if they read my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, or, any of a number of other videos and books from me or other people, and they go, oh yeah, of course, this makes sense. Like a bunch of people will tell me it isn't really that they learned anything new. It's just it sort of put the pieces together in an order that made it so obvious. It's like, oh yeah, I instinctively knew that the whole time. Just didn't really lay it out intellectually like that until now. But they were already there. That's why I call them default anarchists. Is just they're already there whether they know it or not. And so there are a lot of those. And there are a lot of people who got there the other way around, including me, who got there by thinking about it and philosophizing about, wait a minute, how can government be legitimate if blah, blah, blah. And then my gut instinct had to follow that. So if your gut instinct is behind, don't feel too bad about it. It's, you've been trained your whole life into an immoral system to feel beholden to a bunch of slimy crooks. And it takes a while for that Pavlovian training to wear off, even when your brain is all the way rid of it. So if you're on the journey and your guts aren't quite keeping up with your brain, don't worry, they'll get there. If you're on the journey and your brain hasn't caught up to your guts, in other words, you're instinctively like, this system is bogus, I'm not quite sure to think, what to think. I hear anarcho-communists talking about stuff and libertarians saying stuff, and I haven't sorted it out. Like, if your gut instinct is already in the mode of this is bogus, don't worry, it doesn't take that much for your brain to catch up. And either way, lots of those people are going to be catching up in the coming weeks and months and years to a degree that the statism is doomed. And for it to collapse from the whole world, that's going to take a while. But I think we will see, cough, cough, oh no, it's the Rona. We will see in the not that distant future, try not to die within the next few years, we will actually see significant patches of the world where there are no ruling classes and where nobody can get away with ruling the people there. And it'll start as little, and then other people will learn by example and go, wow, you can do that? And then other people will try it, and it'll expand and expand. Because whether intellectually or at a gut level, a lot of people are falling out of the cult of statism, and it's awesome to see. Yeehaw.